Hi, welcome to Write More Late. My name is Sarah with the Midwest Writing Center, and today we are talking about commas. The way these Write More Late videos usually go, I will talk about the topic or interview the person, then we'll give updates on the Midwest Writing Center, and then a 5-minute free write. I think everyone thinks they understand commas really well, and I think that no one does. And I mean that. Uh, I every time I start to review the rules of commas, I'm like, oh, I didn't remember that thing, or oh, that's super confusing. And so it's kind of become a pet peeve. It's kind of become a pet peeve of mine, or a pet topic more than a pet peeve. And I think that for folks who do a lot of writing, especially if they want their message to be clear, commas are a really important thing to not overuse. It's obviously also important not to underuse them, but I think more people overuse them. And ordinarily, I would obviously much prefer to be talking about creative writing, but this is sometimes grammar plays a much bigger role than we think in our writing, and with that, punctuation. Now, I want to say, of course, um, it should always go without saying, but rules of language are usually classist. I can't think of an instance in which they're not, but I don't like to generalize when I can't back it up entirely. So, um, we're going to move forward with the comma conversation with that in mind. What we are focusing on is how to use commas to improve clarity. That is why I think probably all punctuation exists, to help you be clear. When we speak, and of course, spoken language came before written language, we don't have these helpers, but we have tone and we have context and we have facial expressions, we have pauses. All of these things help make our message clear. But even sometimes, you're saying something and you're like, oh no, I meant emphasis on this, not this. So confusion happens, and that's where punctuation comes in to help us make ourselves clear. Now, it became my little pet topic when I learned that we were all lied to about commas. And I will talk about this again. I will elaborate on why we were all lied to, or like what the confusion is, what the miscommunication is in that lie that we're told. Um, but first I'll just say what it is. Sometime in elementary school, all of us had a teacher who said that we use commas to denote pauses, and that is not true. That gets really confusing, and that's the thing that most of us do the most that is wrong. If you put a comma every time you pause, you will confuse the crap out of your reader, because your reader is looking for that comma to have meaning. Now, beyond that, the cadence with which we speak is different for all people and is really only clear in context, or like if you're someone like William Shatner, or oh, that other guy who talks funny. you know it's totally unclear what they're saying because they pause so much. So just something to keep in mind. You want to use commas for clarity, not for pausing. Not everybody pauses at the same time. That pause isn't necessarily making you more clear. Just because you really love where you pause doesn't mean that it's helpful to pause there. That's something that I'll get into a little bit more later as well. But in creative writing, if you want to pause a lot, if you want to force your reader to pause, there are better ways to do that are less confusing. So that's something to keep in mind if you are really dedicated to the pause. All right. I'm going to first show you the two books that I used to do my homework here. One is, I already said grammar is a classist construct. That said, this book is really good, but it is outdated. And take it with a grain of salt. That's what I'm going to say about it. So it's The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. A lot of grammar nerds will just refer to it as Strunk and White, but that's the authors. The book is called Elements of Style. I had to buy this for a class. I took a grammar class in college, and so I have real serious notes all over it. I think I've read the entire thing. There's a lot of moments in here where it's funny. E.B. White, as in Charlotte's Web, E.B. White, it was actually very funny. He wrote a lot of nonfiction that was really funny. He did a lot of collaborations with comedy writers. So there's some jokes in here. Like, so here's why it's outdated. There are a lot of things words that have been abused colloquially. Colloquially means like day-to-day conversation. And when we use words colloquially in a way that is not their original meaning, that changes the meaning. So we say literally all the time, right? And what we mean is to put emphasis on the thing that we're saying. We don't mean necessarily that something is literally happening. If I were saying, and it would be weird if I said this, but if I were saying I'm literally live right now, like that would be true. I am live streaming. But if I was laughing really hard and I said I'm literally dead, that would obviously not be literal. So there are a lot of things like that in this book, in which there's a really funny moment where they're explaining that something that is nauseous is something that induces nausea. So it says, don't call yourself nauseous unless you're sure you have that effect on people, meaning I am nauseated. I'm not currently, thankfully. But if I said I'm nauseous, what that would technically mean is that I make other people sick. Obviously, the way we use the word nauseous, it means I feel sick. So language is alive. Language is always changing. That is the cool thing about language. That's why we love it. So if you do read this book and there's a section on misused words, probably like take it with a grain of salt, like I said. The way that we use language is the way that we use language, and language is owned by the people who use it. I think both Strunk and White are dead. They're not using language anymore. It belongs to us now. Yeah, but you can see I have a lot of notes in here, and I really enjoy it. So this is the first book that helped me do my homework. And the second book that helped me do my homework is, I must have bought it for the same class. I don't know why I would own, I only took one grammar class, but it's Webster's New World Punctuation Simplified and Applied. And it is super useful. Every single thing in this book is explained really well, really simply. In fact, there's just a section, just a chapter on commas. It's chapter 4. And that's where I want to start. She says 10 minutes into her video. I was doing my homework and preparing for this, and I saw this first paragraph and I was like, that's it. That's the thing I want to say. The comma is subject to so many rules that it wouldn't be surprising if the average writer preferred to ignore them and instead keep a salt shaker full of commas at hand, ready to sprinkle randomly over the text. Yet the rules governing the comma are actually quite simple once you understand the purpose of this punctuation mark. Yeah, that's how I feel. I feel like most people just have a salt shaker and they're like, well, Mrs. Thompson said to use it when I pause. And here's the next bit. Unfortunately, too many writers tend to insert a comma wherever they themselves would like to pause for a moment. perhaps to think about the next idea. Yet commas aren't meant to give the writer a rest. They only exist to serve the reader. As with all punctuation, the most important reason to place a comma is to clarify the meaning of a sentence. There we go. Okay, so I guess I'll start screen sharing to give some examples. And that will be what I do. We have either not been live this whole time, or we have gone double live. Unclear. Good thing I'm recording this. Okay, screen sharing. I asked permission from an intern to use a piece of his writing as an example because he was really, really good at copy editing and proofreading. And he and I disagreed about this one comma. And I'm right. But it's not an obvious situation. And I think most people would agree with him. And like I said, language is alive. You're allowed to disagree as long as your meaning is clear. I was about to stop live stream instead of screen share. That would have not been cute. Okay. All right, here we go. I made this document just for you today, friends who are with me. So this is from the piece Texting and Loving by Ethan Went. And this highlighted section is the comma we're going to talk about. Two boys stand at the edge of a cliff. One looks up toward the sun, which hangs near the center of a deep blue sky. This is wrong because it's a comma splice. A comma splice is using a comma to connect, well, slow down. Basically, you never want to use one comma at a time, basically. Now that gets complicated, and that's why commas are confusing. Comma splice has a definition, and I used the word wrong. But a lot of the time, a comma splice is using just one comma, and that's a colloquialism. The rule being broken here is never separate a subject and a verb by a lone comma. The subject, okay, what is a subject? A subject is the thing the sentence is about. A verb is the thing the subject is doing. So the sun is the subject here, which is being separated from the thing it's doing, hanging near the center of the deep blue sky. Yeah, so this comma doesn't give me any information. That's the first thing. If we wanted it to, here's my comment over here. This is, if we wanted to use commas, this is how we would do it. One looks up toward the sun, comma, which hangs near the center of the deep blue sky, comma, and starts to tear up. So what we're doing here is starts to tear up refers to the boy. And this is almost parenthetical, right? It's an aside. It's connected information that doesn't have to do practically with the story, but is decor for the story. So here, the sun is hanging near the center of the deep blue sky. The one is one of the boys. Now, a nice little trick that I use is if you aren't making a full sentence outside of the commas, right? Like parenthetical, your commas are wrong. One looks up toward the sun and starts to tear up. The sun, which hangs near the center of the deep blue sky. Good, we got it. 2 commas, full sentence. Parenthetical. Obviously, we know that, I'm going to type it. These are parentheses. Parenthesis. So just one would be a parenthesis, I think. Anyway, those brackets are parentheses. So You can use commas in place of parentheses, but don't. Parentheses should be extra information that's not super relevant, or I mean, in creative writing, there are lots of different ways to use parentheses, but commas, you need that information in that sentence, but it isn't technically moving the action forward. I hope that's helpful. I could just be further confusing things. Generally speaking, you want 2 commas all the time. Is that a little confusing? Yes, because it's not always. The comment that I made there, one looks up toward the sun, which hangs near the center of the deep blue sky, uses 2 commas. I've made the second half of that sentence. I shouldn't have stopped sharing. I apologize. I've made the second part of that sentence a parenthetical and made it a longer sentence, but the edit I made in this publication was to just delete the comma entirely. Now, we will talk about a different example in which that comma would be appropriate later. In my correction that I made with the extra comma, I'm housing the description of the sun separate from the description of the boy. I'm giving the sun and the boy the authority of subject because the story is about the boy, the sentence is about the sun, without confusing or bloating either description. Now, all right, proper definition. A comma splice is a comma used to connect 2 independent clauses, and it is not something you should do. A comma splice is a bad thing. If someone, there's like a editorial mark for it if you are into that. Excuse me. Comma splices are bad. And a comma splice would be using a comma to connect 2 independent clauses. And I have an example in that same screen share. There we go. Here is an example of a comma splice. The box was empty. We unpacked it already. There are a few ways to fix this. These 2 clauses, they could be full sentences, right? They've got all the things you need to be a full sentence. That's what makes them independent clauses. So here in my comment over here are ways to fix it. The word because, this comma is acting like a semicolon or a conjunction. A conjunction is a word that connects or changes in a sentence. The word and, the word because, the word but, the word so, the word for. I don't think for is a conjunction. Anyway, those are all conjunctions, and that's when it's appropriate to use a semicolon, fun fact, in place of a conjunction. So these 2 examples over here are correct. You don't want that comma. That comma is a dirty liar and will end up confusing your reader further. When you put that, you can't see what I'm pointing at. When you put this highlighted thing here in the middle of a paragraph, your reader is going to be searching for more meaning. So you can do your semicolon, or you can add the word because, or you can make it 2 separate sentences. The box is empty, period. We unpacked it already, period. I think I'm going to stop sharing again. Okay, so that dirty pause that our teachers told us about. We are using commas to slow us down, but that is not why they exist. The miscommunication is backwards. Commas show a change, which is often seen in speech with a pause, but commas don't mean pause, and pausing doesn't mean comma. In creative writing, when we want to force the reader to read like we would read, the way that I read, I use lots of pauses when I read out loud when I read my own work out loud. And the way I read is very stilted. there are lots of other tools that we have to do that without being confusing. You can use periods. Periods say full stop. That is their purpose. It's super annoying. How do I say this? You would never do that unless it's in creative writing. You would call it a stylistic choice, and no one could argue with you. It is not at all proper correct. But in creative writing, you really want someone to stop there, you can use a period. You can use a slash, like I'll just screen share these possibilities. Okay, let's go into this space here. Okay, you can use a period. You can use a slash. You can use this thing. This is right above the enter button that's on the right side. I love using this thing. I'm going to make these bold so you can see them, or maybe just bigger. There we go. You can probably use an M dash. I would be careful with that. Editors get really annoyed with M dashes. We overuse them as creative writers. That's factual. I overuse them. You can do anything that's really visually striking. I've seen people use a double set of, is that? It reverted. I've seen people use a double set of colons before, use a ton of colons. It's your work. That's so annoying that it's doing this to me. Okay, there we go. The double set of colons is something that I see pretty often, just to be visually striking and stop the reader in their place. Really, truly, you can do whatever you want in creative writing, but if you use a comma to denote a pause, people are going to look for more meaning, and that's confusing. You could also do double slash. There's a ton. Oh, people use pound a lot, or the number sign, or the tag sign. How old am I? Yeah, there's a ton of options. Look at your keyboard, or you can go through and show your age. Where are symbols listed, friends? Symbols. They're here. I know they are. Special characters. If you were really funky, you could use these. Lots of people do. You are allowed to. Game pieces. That's crazy. Whatever word processing machine you use, you have all of these available to you. Okay. That was my aside on creative writing and the need for pauses. Now we're back to normal comma stuff. I think most people know we use commas in lists. I'm not going to talk about the Oxford comma. Depending on what style guide you're using or your editor is using, there are rules around that. I'm a fan of it personally. If you don't know what an Oxford comma is, that's okay. An Oxford comma is adding a comma before the final item on a list. Technically, you don't have to add a comma before the final item on a list. That's it. That's the Oxford comma. Depending on the style guide you use, they'll have their own rules, but if you don't use a style guide, you don't need to figure that out for yourself. Editors use style guides, and they will be the person you rely on for this information, and they will help you and fix you. Editors are godsends. Editors cannot be underappreciated. I want to make an aside about editors. Editors are so important. I know that there is at least a small community of people who believe that the first art you make is the soul of the art, and that is the finished product. No editing should be done. And it's your art. Do whatever you want to do with it. Personally, I love and I believe in critique, and critique is part of the editorial process. But more than that, editors are particularly important because they are not you, and they can tell you what you're saying so that you can figure out if you're saying what you mean to be saying. They will make sure that you are more clear, both in in executing your intention and on a line by line level. They are educated, they are knowledgeable, and they love words, and they love stories, and they love writing. They are not bad guys. Finding an editor who's a good fit for you is probably pretty difficult. I am very lucky to know and love editors with whom I can have real conversations, not just in the world of writing. And that's important too, because if you can't say the absolute truth of here's what I'm trying to say in this piece, you're going to have a harder time executing what you're really trying to say in your piece. At the end of the day, if you have an editor, they're going to clean up your commas. So that's helpful. But personally, I like to be as clean as possible before I hand it off to someone else. I want to feel like this draft is really, really done. And now I'm ready for eyes. You don't have to be me. It is, best practice. We've talked about this. It's best practice to have a pretty clean draft when you bring it to workshop. But it's probably pretty clean by the time you give it to an editor. Okay, moving on. I'm going to screen share again. This is actually a little shorter, going a little faster than I thought it would today. This is the header because this is the book I was using to get some of these examples and tips. So now you know. Commas are used to clarify. John tipped Mary because he appreciated good service has a different meaning from John tipped Mary because he appreciated good service. In the first one, we're learning why John tipped. In the second one, we're speaking to Mary about why John tipped. We're still explaining why he tipped, which is because he appreciates good service. But in the second one, we're talking to Mary. That depends on context. Only you know the context. Here's one that you see online a lot. Let's eat grandma versus let's eat grandma. The first one is telling us we will eat our grandmothers. The second one is inviting grandma to eat. This one, you used to see this a lot. It was like a psychological puzzle more than a grammar puzzle, where someone would put this on the board or whatever and tell you to add punctuation. And then the experiment is to see which one of these you choose. And as I understand it, it was usually done on gender lines. I don't know. I haven't done this experiment on anyone, but it is examples of how to use punctuation for clarity. Now here is some list items. I actually really like what I've been doing with changing the size of these. Please buy chips, garlic, apples, chalk. That's a list. It has commas separating the items in the list. But if you use the word and between the items, you do not need to use commas, and you should not use commas. I think the real problem with commas is that many of the rules seem like they're being contradicted by other parts of the rules. If you only have two items, you don't need a comma. So if I just wanted garlic and apples, no comma. Even if, well, garlic apples would be a weird thing to get, and that would sound like it's one item if you don't have the word and. This is just saying you don't need to, please never say garlic, comma, and apples. Just garlic and apples. If you want to have garlic apples, let me know how that goes. I like apples in salad sometime. It could be fine. It could be fine. Um, so here is the bit that you can't see my hand. Here's the bit that circles back to Ethan's piece. Introductory info can use commas. He's not using this as introductory info, but if he made that argument, I wouldn't be able to argue with him. The sun, which hangs in the center of the sky. Okay. Okay, the example here is you may feel compelled to add a comma here. Don't. The short version of the reason is one word isn't enough to separate it from the rest of the sentence. The second one, example here, is 4 words. And the comma is optional. The comma is optional. You don't need it. You're allowed to have it. Because of the rain is doing what tomorrow is doing here. It's introductory information. The picnic you could also say, the picnic will be postponed because of rain. The organization, this is the next thing right here. The organization of the sentence matters a lot. You reorganize the sentence, you are not at all compelled to use the comma in the first place. That's why it's optional. So here are more. Where the organization of the sentence matters. This is really similar to an example used in that book, but it starts with this example in the book. Under a stack of papers she graded last night, the teacher found a soiled napkin. So this is still introductory information. It's explaining the sentence to come. So you can use the comma. But if you rearrange it and just say the teacher found a soiled napkin under a stack of papers, no reason to use comma. Using a comma anywhere there would be confusing and bad. My last little bit here, I think is really fun, because I think this is the other place where people get confused, because if you can use commas in these instances, why can't you use them in other instances? And rules mostly, rules and clarity. When in doubt, just ask yourself if it's clear. If you can't tell, and that's one of the reasons that we can't edit our own work, or we are told to read aloud when we're trying to edit or proofread, our brains know what we're trying to say, and so we can't always tell if we've been effective in saying it. So well here is an interjection, which is kind of confusing. And you're allowed to separate it because it's decoration on the sentence. The real sentence is, okay then. Well is an interjection. Well, okay then. My goodness would be an exclamation. You're allowed to use the comma there. You could also use an exclamation point. Just say, my goodness, your hair is wild. And I use the word huh here because I thought it was really encapsulated the meaning of these kinds of words. Right, huh, isn't it, aren't you? Don't you think? You can use commas before those. Some little minor guys here. Keep commas inside quotation marks. Keep punctuation inside quotation marks. There are a lot of examples in the books that I was reading about ways of using punctuation that are wrong that I've never encountered in editing or in the wild. So I didn't think I needed to confuse anyone by showing them more bad examples. Yeah. Another thing is, like I said earlier, you can have a parenthetical clause between commas. You do not want to use both commas and parentheses. If you've got a lot going on inside the parentheses, totally use commas inside the parentheses, but you'll never say, G. John I clearly didn't have a sentence in mind to type there. Um, and this is really confusing because what I've said makes no sense. No comma before the parenthetical. You can do this all you want. Okay. Yeah. So last bits of advice. This went so much faster than I thought I was going to talk about commas forever. Um, the real bit of advice: when in doubt, ask if it's clear. Um, another thought: when in doubt, ask, am I just trying to pause? Or is there a reason for a change in this sentence? Also, when in doubt, use the internet. Ask the internet or ask a friend. That's what I got for you. I hope this helps you write more light into your life. So I'll transition into upcoming events at the Midwest Writing Center. This Saturday, we have, I don't have my calendar in front of me. You all know that's my weakness. This Saturday, we will be at the Quad City Youth Arts Expo. It's going to be all day at Schwiebert Park in Rock Island. It's going to have all sorts of wonderful artists, young artists in different media. And the young emerging writers, some of them, will be taking the stage at 7 p.m. Next week, we have the banned books reading on Wednesday night at the Rock Island Public Library in the community room. That's on the top floor of the building. That'll be really, really awesome. We're going to have some community leaders reading and talking about their favorite banned books and why censorship matters and why we're still talking about it, and what it looks like in other places in the world, and why words matter, why words are powerful. Then on the weekend at the Capreles Manuscript Museum, we have a reading from These Interesting Times from 2 to 4 p.m. Then on the 26th, we have a reading at Bettendorf Public Library from These Interesting Times featuring Joe Chambers, Monica Flink, and Jonathan Turner. That'll be really great. All of these readings from These Interesting Times are folks who haven't read before for These Interesting Times, and that's really exciting. We have so many people featured, so many contributors to that anthology, and we weren't able, because of COVID, to have a real proper release party. And so we're sort of just ongoing celebrating These Interesting Times, and talking about how our lives have changed so much since 2020. And it's really cathartic. It's really beautiful. After that, we have, let's see, I know on October 2nd, we have two things. We've got the Resistance Poetry reading at the German American Heritage Center at 2 p.m. Now, side note for that, any young writer aged 13 to 20 can submit a poem to the German American Heritage Center. And if they are chosen, they will get to read at that event on October 2nd. And they will also get $100, which is a lot of money for a poem. Really big deal. I highly recommend submitting those poems. The deadline for those poems to be submitted is September 20th. So that's 5 days from now. Also on the 2nd is Lowland Block Party at the Labor Space, which is between Roz Talks and Ragged Records in Rock Island on 3rd Avenue. And that's all day as well. And we'll have a handful of readers in and out throughout the day from the Midwest Writing Center. Do we want to do a free write? Let's do a free write. I don't have my stuff with me. I wanted to be in the room with the books and change your environment. You don't have all your goodies. Okay, so let's I have definitely had this free write before, but I want you to play with commas. So if you just want a proper free write, write whatever it is for 5 minutes, cool, do that. Otherwise, I encourage you to write a list. You can play with commas whatever way you would like to. For me, often when I write lists, I do them like a bulleted list, like I press enter. I have a fresh line for every item on the list. I want you to have your list in the text. If you're a poet and you would rather work on poetry, I still want you to use a list. You can list whatever you want. I don't care. But have it in text. So, pulling up my phone for that 5-minute timer. Gonna use my, oh, I've got a notebook I can use here. Get a real close up of my hair. There's my timer. Okay, 5 minutes. Take it away. Two minutes. 15 seconds. Always scares the crap out of me. Okay. I also want to say, because I had some issues with the live, like I can't see it. I don't know if any of you are asking questions or not, or if anyone's here at all. Um, I think this would have been a lot more fun with live interaction, but I mean it's 1 p.m. on a weekday. I understand people have lives, and also I can't access the live stream. So that complicates things a little bit, but reach out. Let me know if you have any topics you'd like me to talk about, if there's a topic you'd like to talk about, or if you have questions because it got confusing and commas are hard. You're used to using a salt shaker. Okay. I hope that was helpful. I hope that you write more light into your life.